next watercolor supply that I'm going to cover is the paint. And out of the three main supplies, the paper, the brushes, and the paint is another supply that it is important to buy the professional grade or artist grade paint rather than the student grade paint. And it really can make a difference on how the paint looks on your paper and how it performs when you're using it. So the kinds of student grade paint that you should avoid and try not to purchase is Winsor & Newton Cotman, Van Gogh, and I can't remember some of the brand names or who makes them for these, but Cotman, Van Gogh, Academy, Prang, Reeves, and Yarka. I'm not sure if Yarka is a student grade paper or paint, but I know some of my students in classes a while back had used, it's a set that you can get, and they just didn't perform as well as some of the other brands of paint. So then I have on a piece of paper here the professional or artist grade paints, and in this case, if it says professional or artist on it, unlike on some of the papers, generally the paint that have that written on it, or even in this case it says finest and then artist's watercolor, then that means it is a quality professional grade paint. Now one of the tubes I have here, and I'm not sure if this one, nope, that one says it. I do not know that the Core series says that on it, and I'm not seeing it, so that would be one that doesn't have it on there. So the brands are Daniel Smith, which is this one right here, the Winsor & Newton, and Winsor & Newton has both professional grade paint and then the student grade paint. Holbein, which it says artist grade on it. Winsor & Newton says extra fine watercolor, so I don't know that they say artist or professional on it, but it's their only paint as they do is the professional grade. De La Rowney says, and this may be an old tube, it says artist right there, I just read that. And then Grumbacher, and it says artist watercolor. The Imgram paint says artist watercolor on it, and it is a different base for the pigment in there, so I'll talk about that. And then there is Mission, which I only have one tube from them, and I have not really used it that much, but it is a paint that's a lot of people are starting to talk about and like, so I pulled out the one tube I have, and it says artist watercolor on it. And then this is Core, and it is a new watercolor pigment that's by the Golden Artist Paint Company, and it's QOR is their brand, and they have a different binder than some of these other paints, and I will talk about that. So on my palette, I used to have a mix of a lot of different companies, and I liked paint from a lot of the different ones. And then I started getting into and using the Daniel Smith pigment a lot more, and so most of my palette now contains the Daniel Smith paint. And so I think out of all of these colors on my palette, I have maybe 3 or 4 that are not Daniel Smith. And don't let this worry you, because these are paints that I have, or pigments that I have added to my palette over time, and I don't expect my students to start with a palette full of all of these different colors. And I will talk about what you can do as a base base palette of paint, and what works to get started. So you don't need to start with all of those colors, and sometimes it's better not to have all of those colors to choose from, because it can get confusing, and you can end up not really knowing how to mix the color you want to get, just because you have so many choices to work with. So it's better sometimes to limit yourself in the beginning. So the difference in the binders, and I'm not sure what all of the binders are, but I do know for Daniel Smith, and I believe for Winsor Newton and Holbein, that they use a binder that's gum arabic, and it comes from the acacia tree. For Daniel Smith, they only include in their pigment the paint, which is the pigment, and the binder. So they have very luscious colors, and that's one of the reasons why I use their paint. And so when I pull paint out on and put it on my paper, it is very vibrant, and the colors come out of the wells very easily. It's after they have dried, then I can re-wet them, and it's easy to pull the paint out and use it and apply it to my paper. And then also they have a very stringent testing system in-house, and they have a couple chemists that check all of their batches, and they do their own light fast testing. And so I feel secure in knowing that their labeling and information about their pigments is correct, and that it's going to last for a long time. So you can see I have a lot of paint in the wells of my palette, and with watercolor you can leave your pigment in the wells and then just re-wet, and then periodically add more pigment to those wells. And so I fill up my wells, sometimes not completely, and depending on if I've used the paint recently, like I have used a lot of cobalt recently, so some have less in them than others might. And so when you buy a large tube, this is a 15 milliliter tube, and then a smaller standard size tube is the 5 milliliter, and that would be this size. This is also from Holbein, and it's a 5 milliliter tube. And then the Mission tube size is 7 milliliters. That's not quite a standard. So the 15 and the 5 are standard. This is a 7 milliliter, and then the core tubes are 11 milliliters. So they're not quite a standard that is seen by a lot of the other companies. So I buy the 15 milliliter tubes most of the time, whether it's Daniel Smith or some other brand, and I will take maybe a third to maybe not quite half, but somewhere around a third of a tube, and really apply it and put it into the well so that I get a good amount of paint in there. So when I'm painting, I don't have to really dab at it to get paint out of there. So I'll go ahead and open this up. This is Aureolin Yellow, and I'll just put some new pigment in there because it was needing it anyway. So you can see I can just kind of fill that up, and I can use that for quite a while, quite a few paintings. And so it's not like I'm having to buy new tubes of paint a lot. Okay. And I would say probably the 5 milliliter, if you got one of these to start with, you could probably use the whole tube in your wells on your palette, depending on how large your wells are, of course. So I'm going to move all of this out of the way. And another form of paint that you can purchase is in these little plastic containers, and the name has just skipped my brain, but they come sometimes pre-filled depending on the brand that you're buying. And I know this travel palette says Van Gogh on here, and that's one of the student grade paints I said not to buy. But what I did was I actually cleaned out the student grade paint, and then I filled it with the pigments that I use all the time, and then those just can pop in and out, and they're easy to change if you have other paint that you want to switch out every now and then. So this is just a travel size palette, and it has some mixing areas, and you can see I didn't clean it the last time I used it. And my pigments in my travel palettes are usually a little messier than they might be on my palette. So I tend to keep my palette colors clean, because I will take the pigment out of the well and put it out here, and then I will mix. And so I try not to take my brush that might have blue paint on it and put it into my red paint, and so I keep my pigments around my palette clean that way. And then let's see, before I go into the palettes, because I can talk about that in a little bit under the other supplies, I will talk about a base set of colors that you can get, and that would include the primaries and or one set of the primaries and a brown. So one way that you can buy your colors is by buying a red, a yellow, and a blue, and then purchasing a brown, because the brown can help change some of these mixes so that you get a full range of color. So one primary set that you might look at is ultramarine blue, and this doesn't matter what brand of paint you buy it in. Some brands of paint might list them in other ways. For instance, Windsor and Newton, they say for some of their colors, instead of it being phthalo blue that most brands will go by as the name, they call it Windsor Blue. So you can get a little bit of variation depending on the company. But ultramarine blue or French ultramarine is a standard pigment for most companies, so that would be one. Hansa Yellow Light, or Aureolin Yellow, which I have right here, and I'll put that up there. So Hansa Yellow Light is very similar to a lemon yellow, and so I have that, and then quinacridone Rose, or if you're buying from the Holbein brand, it might be Permanent Rose, and then Burnt Sienna, so a nice brown. And the brown can be mixed, like I said, with some of these colors to change them to make nice mixes. So it's good to have that option where some of these, when you mix them, you're not going to quite get the same look that you will if you have that brown. So if you can buy nothing else to start your watercolor paints with, I think that would be a good range. And you can buy them in the 5 milliliter tubes. You wouldn't have to buy them in the larger 15 milliliter. So then another way to get started and make a set in the beginning is by doing a split primary set of colors. And so that's what this would be. And split primary means buying 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 2 blues, and then I still suggest buying the burnt sienna. And my 2 reds are Parole Scarlet, which is a warm red. It's more orange, on the orange side of red. And the quinacridone Rose, and that's a cooler red. This is New Gamboge Yellow. It's a warmer yellow. And this is Hansa Yellow Light again, and it's a cooler yellow. And I will put those that way. Phthalo Blue, and different people say it differently. I see this as a warm blue because it leans toward green and yellow, on the green side of blue. It's a turquoisey blue. And then ultramarine blue is a cooler blue because it leans toward the purple side, or it's got some red in it. So those 6 colors are a great starter set, and you can buy them from Daniel Smith as a starter set in 5 milliliter tubes. So they would be the smaller tube size, and this is Holbein, but it would be this tube size in this set. And they have the Hansa Yellow Light, New Gamboge, the Parole Scarlet, the Quin Rose, Phthalo Blue, and the Ultramarine Blue in this set. So the only other paint that you might want to buy then would be the Burnt Sienna. And this set is somewhere, actually I think all of these sets that I have out here are somewhere around the $25 range, depending on where you buy them. So that's the Daniel Smith, either buying them as individual tubes, 15 milliliter, or you could buy the set. Okay, and then let me put this back in here. Holbein has its own kind of set that you can get. Now this one, oh, and before I say that, when you buy a set like this, then you would mix colors in order to get your other colors. So by mixing the blues and the yellows, you get a green. By mixing the yellows and the reds, you get an orange. Or by mixing the reds and the blues, you can get purple. Okay, so we'll move those. So effectively, by buying those colors, you can make a whole range of colors from them. Then the Holbein set is kind of doing that same kind of thing where they have some of the primaries, and then they've added a few, well, one secondary color. So this is Crimson Lake. It's a red. This is Vermilion Hue, and it's somewhere between red to orange. A Permanent Yellow Deep, and this is Viridian, which is a green. Cobalt Blue, and then Burnt Sienna. So this would be another option for a beginner set. They're professional artist grade paint, and it would be a good basic set. American Journey, which is through Cheap Joe's, is a artist grade paint, and it's a lower priced paint. They have both 15 milliliter tubes, and I believe, I don't know if they have it for every color, but I think they have larger, maybe 37 milliliter tubes, and they might have 5 milliliter, but I'm not positive about that. So they have a set on their site, and you might also be able to find these through other art stores and or like on Amazon. So in their set they have a warm red, cadmium scarlet, cool red, permanent rose, cobalt for blue. They have Skips green, and I'm not sure what Skips, how it relates to other brands, because it's their own name. Then they have Gamboge, which would be a warm yellow, and Coastal Fog, which is a gray of some kind. So their set is a good basic set to start with as well. You can get quite a few different mixes and colors out of that set. And then Core has their new claim to fame is that their paint is more brilliant in color because the binder that they use is a clear binder, and so they say that their paint is brighter and stronger in color. So I have this tube, and I think I have a blue as well, and I haven't really played around with them a lot. I did hear from an artist friend that they don't necessarily mix well with other pigments because of how the binder works, and so that would be something to note. So they have an introductory set as well, and some art stores are now carrying this introductory set. I know the Meiningers, where I am, carries this set, and then they also have other sets as well. So in their set they have Hansa Yellow Light, Phthalo Blue Green Shade, Ultramarine Blue, Parole Red Light, Permanent Alizarin Crimson, and Burnt Sienna. So their basic set is pretty much like the Daniel Smith set, except they're missing a warmer yellow. And so they have burnt sienna in their set, so instead of adding a burnt sienna, for instance, to the Daniel Smith set, for this set you might add a warm or cadmium yellow. Medium is what I wrote down here. So I will leave these out for a second in case anyone wants to pause their video and you can take note of these colors or these sets. Move this down for just a second and I will put these back out. So this would be if you were buying tubes. Okay, and I'll move that out of the way. So if you wanted to see that all together, then those are different sets that you could purchase, or the tubes of paint. And then there are a lot of other colors that you can always add to your palette, and that might be something that you want to do over time after you've worked with some of those starter colors and get an idea of things that you feel like you'd like to experiment with or use. What was I going to say? All of these sets are 5 milliliter tubes, except for the American Journey, which is 15 milliliter tubes, and their set is more expensive. So these three sets are around like I said, around the $25 range. And then the American Journey is around, for the 6 tubes, is about $55, and so that's somewhere around $9 a tube. And then depending on the pigment, when you go to buy it from other brands, whether it's Daniel Smith or other brands, these tubes of paint can vary in price anywhere from around $8 to $9 on the low end, up to around $12 to $15 for a more expensive pigment. So the difference in price varies because each pigment is made differently and requires either different minerals or chemicals or things in order to create them. So the way you can tell a price range is, I don't know, oh yeah, it is on here. On this tube of Parole Scarlet, it says it's a Series 3. So if you were going to start your price range at maybe $9, and then it might go up another couple dollars every series. Series 1 would be the $9 range, and then this paint might be around $13. And let's see. This one is a Series 2. The New Gamboge is a Series 1. So you can see that can be a range of prices. And again, like I said, one 15 milliliter tube could last you quite a while depending on how much of that pigment you use and how much of it you use in the paintings you're doing. And quite a while would be months. It could be 3 to 6 months of having one tube of pigment. All right, so one of the things I wanted to do before I move on is that the other thing to think about for your paint is that I look for pigments that are light fast, and it will say on some tubes that it's light fast. So light fast meaning that you don't want to paint a painting and have it hanging in a house, your house or a friend's or a customer's house, and have it fade in the next year or more. It could, it could fade in 5 years, but light fast means that it has a longevity, and that in your lifetime and hopefully in your offspring's or family member's lifetime, your paint will not fade off of your painting. So this pigment is a light fast of 1 being the highest rating, and so I always choose the pigments that are going into my palette and make sure that they're either a light fast rating of 1 or a 2. When it gets toward that middle range, I think a 3 and a 4 in Daniel Smith is their rating, 4 being the worst. But there may be some companies that go from 1 to 5, so it's a good thing to check out. And then I think Winsor and Newton, I don't know if they have it on their tubes. Yeah, this one has it. It's just hard to read, so it says light fast. And then it has its number, which I can't quite see here, with that shiny silver tube. And then Holbein, it has some stars. So I think that's its light fast rating. So I think that's it's a 2, which is still fine. So that would be another thing to note. So from the student grade pigment to the professional grade pigment, the difference is, and the reason I suggested that you should avoid buying the student grade pigment is that the student grade pigment usually has fillers in it, which means a chalky type of substance in order to extend the paint, and then they don't have to put as much pigment into that mix. So the problem with that is that it can look kind of chalky when you're painting with it. It won't be as bright, and you will end up having to use more pigment in order to get the same kind of look that you might with less from an artist grade paint. And then the other part to that is, depending on the pigment and the brand, the student grade pigments may not be as light fast as some of these other brands are. Okay, so I'm going to move that. And I wanted to show you right quick before I go on to other supplies. The difference in the brush. I'm going to back up for a few minutes and talk about these brushes, because I wanted you to see why I use such a big brush. And so these two are synthetic brushes, and they are both a size 10. And if I take some paint out, and I'm going to just use this one to get it out with, and I'm wetting the watercolor, and you can see how with the Daniel Smith paint I can really just get that wet and pull out a lot of pigment. And so I'm going to really put a lot of water and pigment out here, because I'm going to put both brushes into this to use it. So I'm just trying to roll my brush in it to really load it up. And then I'll get this one wet, and usually when I start a painting I wet my brushes first to make sure that they're ready to accept the paint and the water. And then I'm just going to do the same thing where I'm kind of rolling it around. I don't normally paint this way, but I want to really fill these brushes with paint. And then I'll start with this is the Gray Matters brush that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to go down the page, whoops, and just make a line and see how far I can go without reloading my brush before it starts skipping and running out of color. So that's starting to skip, and now I'm seeing little places where it's, yeah, there you go. So now it's run out of water, and you get some skipping on the page, and I'll lift this just a little bit so that you can hopefully see that. And then I will do the next one. So that's the Gray Matters number 10 synthetic. This is the Escoda synthetic. It's a number 10 as well. And I'll just start here. So one of the things I noticed with the Escoda compared to the Gray Matters was that it starts to skip a little sooner, but the secondary lines that are in here are a little stronger in color. And now it's skipping pretty good. So This one got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, kind of at the 7th line it was really skipping a lot. This one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about the 6th, and definitely at the 7th line it's skipping quite a lot. So they're pretty equal in when they started to skip. This one seemed to be a little bit stronger at first in how much pigment it held and kept the lines darker. Now I'm going to show you the, this is the Escoda Sable Kolinsky brush that I have. And it is a number 8, so it is a smaller brush, and it's a natural hair brush. It's not a synthetic. Okay, so I'm getting the pigment in there, just kind of loading it up the same way I did the other brushes. And then do the same thing. Woo! That one's starting to skip pretty fast. And it's partly because it's a smaller brush. It's not holding as much pigment as the number 10s. And normally I would expect a sable brush to hold quite a bit, but it may be the size of this, it's not holding as much. So I'm going to move this over, and then I'm going to show you with my bigger brush what it will do. So I'm just kind of really rolling it around in there like I did the other ones. And because this has a good point to it, I can still go with thinner lines. So even though I could go bigger lined if I wanted to, I can use the point of this brush to really do thin lines. And then I just turned it over there because the tip was a little wide and I wanted to continue to do, whoops, trying to get the lines all the same width, which I obviously wasn't doing there for a few seconds. So you can see how, though, I still have a lot of color in this brush and it hasn't started to skip yet. And I'm trying to be pretty even, although I did do a few narrower there. Still not skipping. Still not skipping. So I am almost 3 times the size of those other brushes, and now I'm maybe noticing a little bit of some skipping. But it's more that I've kind of run out of pigment and I've gone all the way across the page. So you can see I can do thin lines, as you saw right there with this big brush, and I can hold a lot of water and paint. And so having a large brush with a good point is important to do a watercolor and give yourself enough time to paint an area and not run out of color or water if needed. So I wanted to show you that right quick. All right, so I am going to go over the other supplies of watercolor next, and I will clear this stuff off and I will be right back.